I'm 34, and I used to think my best trait was steadiness. I'm the guy who sets the coffee maker the night before, who knows which neighbor's kid is allergic to peanuts, who keeps extra phone chargers in every drawer because someone always forgets one. That was my identity, the reliable person. It's funny how one night can take that identity, rip it down the middle, and hold it up like a joke. The night I walked into my bedroom and found my wife, Mara Linwood, entangled with two men, I didn't even feel my heart break at first. What I felt was disbelief, like my brain refused to render the scene. It was as if a stranger had stepped into my life and swapped out the script. We met in Denver at an open-air screening behind a coffee roastery. Late September, white string lights across the alley, espresso smell seeping into the night. Mara was with two friends who looked like they belonged in a band, thrift store jackets, silver rings. She wore a mustard cardigan and laughed with her whole face, head tilted back, palms open. I noticed her because she didn't perform that laugh for anyone. She just let it happen. By the end of the movie, I'd asked for her number. She typed it into my phone and changed her name to Mara Banana Bread Girl. Because we'd argued about whether walnuts ruined banana bread, they do. It's wild, the tiny moments your entire life hooks itself onto, like a coat caught on a splinter. We fell into rhythm quickly. My friend said we were disgustingly domestic in record time. I'm a brand designer. My days were fonts, hex codes, and clients who used the word synergy, unironically. Mara worked mornings at a place on Colfax that sold croissants people lined up for in the snow. She smelled like orange zest and butter when she got home. At night, we watched documentaries with the closed captions on because she liked the sound of the narrator's voice cut clean by the text. We wrote each other notes and stuck them in odd places. I once found, "Drink water, plant, taped to the fern, I always forgot to water." She found, "You are a human espresso shot, tucked under the sugar jar." If you had asked me back then about my wife's dream, I would have told you she was born for it. Acting wasn't a hobby, it was the thing under her skin. She tried to pursue it in college, but her parents, Ethan and Ruth Linwood from Golden, believed in solid careers with 401ks and health insurance. Acting was an elective, not a life. So she majored in communications and worked in cafes and felt theaters call her like an unanswered phone. The first time she said out loud that she wanted to try again, I told her to go all in. "I'll carry the rent," I said. "You carry the dream." I said it like I was brave, like I was doing something noble, but the truth is, it felt good to stand between her and the world and say I could take the hit. The first year, I watched her bloom. She signed up for night classes, learned how to breathe into lines until they settled in her chest, auditioned for community theater and small student films. We'd rehearse scenes in the living room, and she'd stop, adjust the light so the shadow fell differently across her face, and start again. When she landed a role in a scrappy play set in a laundromat, I brought flowers that looked like fireworks and cried in the back row when she monologued about losing a sock and finding a whole life. Somewhere in year 2, the weather of our house shifted. It wasn't a single storm. It was the way you don't notice winter has ended until one day you walk outside and there aren't any piles of old snow left against the curb. The changes were specific, small, and then they were all I could see. She started leaving later and coming home later still. Her phone used to live on the kitchen counter charging, open like a book. Now it lived face down, silenced, tucked into her jacket pocket even when she showered. She bought new dresses, sleek, sharper than her old style, and said they were for industry events. She used words like that now: industry, network, intimacy coordinator. She stopped leaving notes. When I asked benign questions, she flinched. "Who's Sasha?" I said one night, trying to sound casual. She texted about call time. Mara wiped her lipstick with a tissue and sighed like I'd asked why she'd fallen in love with the sun. "Scene partner," she said, "from the workshop." I nodded, but the word scene felt loaded, like gunpowder in the throat. A week later, she was running lines with another actor after rehearsal. She texted at midnight, "Don't wait up, we're blocking a new ending." And I stared at the blue glow on the ceiling and counted the number of times you can betray a person without touching them. My best friend Jonah was the first to say it out loud. We were eating tacos from a truck on Federal, and he said, "Look, man, I'll be the jerk if I have to. Some people in that world sleep with whoever they think can move them forward, and some are normal. You know your wife, but I'm telling you to keep your eyes open." I told him, "Mara's not like that." He shrugged, salsa dripping onto his shoe. "Nobody is until they are." I started noticing the intimacy of things, the way she smelled like a new cologne sometimes, not mine. a smudge of foundation on the collar of a jean jacket that wasn't hers, a receipt in our shared email for a hotel room in Boulder charged to her card the same night she was at an overnight rehearsal because it was safer not to drive. I wanted to be the kind of man who said, "I trust you," and made it true. I wanted to be invulnerable to suspicion, but the body knows. Mine clenched around a truth I refused to say, but the body knows. The night she didn't come home until 4 a.m., I sat at the kitchen table with the light off and the window open, listening to Colfax at closing time, laughter that sounded like glass, the ripple of a bus sighing. When she unlocked the door and slid in like a teenager, I asked, "Was the ending blocked?" She flinched and said, "Why are you awake?" as if that were the sin. She kissed my forehead, smelled like smoke and mint, and went to shower. Maybe she cried in there. Maybe I imagined it. The tiles echoed like a chapel. 2 days later, I hired a private investigator. I didn't tell Jonah because I didn't want anyone to make it real. The guy's name was Reese, late 40s, wore a broad-brimmed hat like a private joke, talked in clipped sentences that felt like captions under security footage. I told him I wanted 7 days. "If I'm wrong," I said, "I pay you and I'm an idiot, and that's the best possible outcome." He nodded like he'd heard that 100 times. On the third night of surveillance, I drove to Fort Collins to help my mother fix a cabinet door that wouldn't close. We drank tea and she told me my father had started sleeping in the recliner again because his shoulder was acting up. I pretended to worry only about wood glue. Around 10, Reese called and said, "She's not at rehearsal." My mouth dried up. I walked out onto my mother's patio and watched a moth beat itself against the porch light. "Where is she?" I asked. "With a man," he said. "With a man," he said. "I'll have everything documented. You want me to keep following?" I said yes. I said it again even though he'd already hung up. I didn't drive back that night. I lay on the guest bed and stared at the ceiling fan until it swam. I thought about Mara's parents, about Ruth telling me once in her kitchen that she was glad I was ground. For Mara, because her daughter had always been a kite, and kites need strings. It sounded sweet then. Now it sounded like someone tying a bow to an anchor. The next morning, Reese said, "I have photos. You might want to come in." I drove too fast, hands buzzing, a feeling like static in my ribs. Reese's office was a beige waiting room for bad news. He slid a manila envelope across the desk. Inside, Mara's car parked outside a brick building I didn't recognize. Mara walking out hand in hand with a blonde man who looked like a toothpaste commercial. Mara kissing him in the driver's seat. Mara laughing under a street lamp while he tucked hair behind her ear. Mara with him again on the night she'd claimed to be at a birthday party for a castmate, her phone dark while mine filled with unanswered calls. There was a video too. Grainy, clear enough, door opening, body slipping inside, curtains closing. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I thought, oh, okay, so the floor is not a floor. It's a trap door. Reese watched my face the way a doctor watches a monitor. "There's more," he said after a minute. "She's at your place right now. Same car, same guy." The words slid into my ears like ice. He asked if I wanted him to come. I said yes because I was afraid of what I would do if my only witness was rage. We pulled up to my house and the blue sedan from the photos was shining on my driveway like something a game show host might unveil. My keys felt heavier than they should have. The smell hit me in the hallway, some expensive cologne, that lemon cleaning spray we use, and something warm and blunt that made me want to scrub my skin off. Our bedroom door wasn't shut all the way. I pushed it. Here's the part where sequence goes soft. I saw Mara on our bed in a piece of black lace that looked like a dare. Her wrists were tied to the headboard with silk scarves I recognized because I bought them in a market when we visited Santa Fe. 2 men were with her, the blonde from the photos and someone else with a tattoo that looked like a constellation. There was music playing on a tinny phone speaker. The blonde said, "Holy shish!" and scrambled. The tattooed one snatched his jeans and bolted like a spooked animal. Mara made a sound that had no name and then, "Ethan, wait, please, this isn't." My own voice came out low and wrong. "Don't finish that sentence," I said. I charged at the blonde, but Reese was there with a hand on my chest, steady, heavy, a reminder that there are consequences that have nothing to do with justice. Mara twisted against the scarves and sobbed. "It's not what you think," she said, like a satire of every Lifetime movie. "It's for a scene. It's experimental. We're rehearsing." I barked a laugh so sharp it hurt my throat. "In my bed?" I asked. "With 2 men? You didn't have a prop couch at the theater?" I left before I did something I could not take back. I told her, "Be gone by the time I get home," because movie lines were all I had. I slept at Jonah's on his lumpy couch. He didn't ask for the details. He sat on the floor with his back against the coffee table and handed me a beer and said, "Tell me when you can." The beer tasted like nothing. I tried to picture Mara's face without the expression it had worn in the bedroom, and I couldn't. It was like reimagining a house without its own blueprint. In the morning, I drove home. Her car wasn't there. Her shoes were gone from the rack. The bed was stripped. She was in the kitchen looking like a ghost of herself. No makeup, eyes swollen. She said my name in a way that had once made me put down whatever I was holding. "Please," she said. "Please, can we talk?" I told her to talk for exactly 3 minutes. She said words about confusion, about how acting blurs lines, about the pressure to be open and fearless. She said she felt objectified at auditions and that this experiment had felt like taking the power back. She said she loved me. She said she hated herself. I watched her mouth form these shapes and thought about that night in Santa Fe when she'd held up silk scarves to a booth light to watch the color shift and told me every color is just a trick of the eye. I put her suitcase on the porch. She went quiet and then bright with fury in a way I'd seen exactly once before when a barista messed up her drink and laughed about it. "You would throw away 2 years over a performance exercise?" she shouted. I said, "No, I'm throwing it away because you lied." She threw in that line people reach for when cornered. "You never supported my dream, you just wanted control." I laughed again, softer this time. Control is a strange word to lob at the man who rescued your Gmail password, who built a spreadsheet for your auditions, who packed you soup when you were too nervous to eat. She left for the suitcase and her rage and the obligation to call her mother and tell her daughter's world had cracked. You'd think that would be the worst of it. I thought so. If this were a tidy story, we'd fade to a lawyer's office and a judge's signature. But what happened next was messier, naughtier, and somehow even uglier because it asked me to perform a new version of myself, the man who takes revenge. It started with an email I wasn't supposed to see. 6 months earlier, when Mara switched phones, she'd asked me to help set up her iCloud, and she never disabled the shared photo stream. After I threw her out, I went to move our photos into a folder I could look at without vomiting. A notification pinged, new memories available. I tapped without thinking, and there it was, a looping video of the blonde man's hand tracing a heart on fogged glass with M+S inside it. S. His name wasn't in anything Reese had shown me. The message attached to the memory read, "Ocean House this weekend," and a date, 3 weeks from now. I clicked through old shares and found screenshots, a conversation with S. Lyon, a selfie of Mara in a hotel robe I'd never seen, a picture of the blonde asleep with his back to the camera, and a raised mole I could identify in a lineup. Under one thread, the blonde had sent, "Can you get us into director's night? I'll convince Oliver." Oliver. I remembered Mara saying, "Oliver Oberlin is the real deal," half whisper, like she was telling me the tide was back. I Googled Oliver. He was a young director with a moody headshot and a string of micro-budget films that had played at festivals where people wore lanyards and argued about shots over green juice. In a recent interview, he was thanked by a man named Simon Lang, the man in the photo with the heart drawn in steam. The blonde wasn't just Mara's fling, he was the director's partner, and my wife had been sleeping with both of them. The double betrayal felt theatrical in a way that almost made me laugh until I remembered theater had been our religion. Here's where I admit something I'm not proud of. When the idea came, it didn't feel like revenge. It felt like correcting the record. Mara had told me a story, that what I saw was art, experiment, blurred lines. I wanted to show the true cut. I emailed Oliver. I told him I had information about someone in his circle that he'd want to see in person, that I wasn't a troll or an anonymous tipster, that my name was Ethan Cole and my wife had been part of his workshops. He wrote back in an hour and suggested a cafe in Reno that sold pour-overs like surgical procedures. He walked in wearing a black coat even though it was sunny, handsome in a way that made you forgive him instantly. He shook my hand like we were old colleagues. I didn't make a speech. I slid the folder across the table, photos of Mara and Simon, a time-stamped video of my bedroom door opening, screen grabs of texts. "Can't get enough. He fell asleep. Come over. Oliver's at the studio. You have 20 minutes. I watched the romance leave Oliver's face like a light turned off. He swallowed, took the napkin dispenser between his hands, and squeezed like he was trying to wring water out of steel. "I had dreams about this," he said, almost to himself, and then he laughed, a short, broken sound. "Thank you," he said, and that word sat wrong in my stomach. He asked, "Why show me?" And I said, "Because honesty is sometimes the only weapon you get." He didn't yell. He sent a text. He blinked hard, Twice, he asked for a copy he could keep. I forwarded him everything. He stood, shook my hand again, longer, warmer. "I'm sorry," he said, and by then I wasn't entirely sure who he meant he was sorry for. Mara was removed from the show that week. The theater company issued a bland press release about restructuring for artistic reasons, but everyone read between the lines. Simon moved out of Oliver's place, according to the gossip Jonah harvested from a friend who worked box office. Mara sent me a single text, "You did this!" I didn't answer. The truth sat between us like a pane of glass she kept throwing herself against. The divorce paperwork moved forward, but the emotional litigation kept finding new exhibits. Mara tried to go around me through our families. She took her mother to lunch and cried. Ruth called and left a voicemail that started with, "I'm not taking sides," and ended with, "You know artists are different, Ethan." My mother asked if I was eating and offered to drop off lasagna like grief was a casserole you could freeze. I met with a lawyer named Vic who wore bright socks and said things like, "What we want is a clean break. We drafted terms. We canceled the joint card." I changed the locks. The locksmith told me I was his third that week, and I wanted to ask the others what their bedrooms had looked like. I could end the story here. Many people do. We signed. I walked away with my name and the house and an allergy to the smell of lemon cleaner. She walked away with a string of small rolls that evaporated as the story of her blurry lines spread, and she froze me out of her Instagram like that could make me disappear. But there were more turns ahead, because human beings don't become new people just because the calendar flips. One night in December, I was on the light rail heading home from a late meeting when I saw Mara on the platform at Union Station. She wore the red coat I'd given her for our anniversary, the one that made her look like the lead in a winter movie. Simon stood 2 feet away, hands jammed into his pockets, not touching her. We made eye contact for a second too long. I nodded once. She looked down, then back up with that stage face, the expression you put on when you need to be seen, even if it kills you. Then Oliver appeared, walking fast, a bruise-colored fatigue over his features. He didn't look at her. He looked at me. He gave the slightest tilt of his head, as if to say, "We're both survivors of the same disaster." The train came and swallowed the scene. The next twist arrived because the universe enjoys a punchline. In January, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was a woman named Camila who introduced herself as the co-owner of a yoga studio where Mara sometimes taught a movement for actors class. "I'm calling," she said carefully, "because we found an AirTag sewn into the lining of our studio couch, and it's registered to your Apple ID." Every hair on my arm stood up. I didn't put it there. I hadn't even used an AirTag. We tracked it through the app while I was on the phone. It had pinged the studio, the theater, Oliver's apartment building, my house weeks before the discovery. Someone had cloned my ID or used an old tag I'd tried once, failed to set up, and thrown in a drawer. "Did Mara have access to your devices?" Camila asked. I laughed, that brittle laugh again. She had access to my whole life. I changed every password I had, canceled the old devices, sat on the floor and wondered how many ways a person could be careless with you while calling it love. Mara showed up on my porch in February. It was the warm kind of snow, the kind that melts when it hits your sleeve. She didn't look dramatic, she looked raw. "I'm not here to fight," she said before I could speak. "I need to say this to your actual face." I let her in because I am not a monster, no matter what she'd called me in messages I didn't read. We stood in the kitchen like our future was still somewhere in a cupboard. "I was cruel," she said. "I told myself stories that made it okay." I told myself you were holding me back because that sounded less ugly than I wanted something, and I was willing to destroy what I had to get it. She cried then, quietly, without theater. I thought of the first time I'd seen her cry in our first winter together when a dog was hit on Spear Boulevard and she made me pull over so she could sit with it until the owner arrived. I believed she could be that version again, but I did not want to pay the price for her to find her way back to that person. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," she said. "I'm asking you to know that I know what I did." I nodded. That was all there was. It would be a lie to say I felt triumphant. Revenge wasn't a victory lap. It was a complicated, thorned action that kept cutting me even as it made sense. When Oliver texted me a month later, "We wrapped the cut, thanks for the clarity you gave me," I watched the tiny dots blink and disappear. I didn't reply. What was there to say? He made a short film about heartbreak that won an audience award at a festival where people who once smoked with Simon now refused to look at him, and the irony tasted like metal. The lawyer called in March to say the judge had finalized everything. My hand shook. Steadiness is not the same as invulnerability. I took half a day off and drove west with the windows down until the mountain spilled the windshield. I stopped at a trail I'd never walked, hiked until my calves burned, and sat on a rock watching snowmelt etch tiny paths down the hillside. A family tramped by with a kid in a dinosaur hat who roared at a pine cone. I laughed for real, alone on a rock, like a man who had finally found the bottom of a trap door and realized it was a floor after all. This part is boring and necessary. I stopped checking her socials, I donated the sheets from our bed, I learned to like sleeping diagonally. I went to therapy and told a woman with velvet shoes that I felt like a bruise in the shape of a person. I stopped trying to answer questions that had no answers. Did she ever love me? Did she love me differently than I loved her? Was I a safety net, or a free pass, or a real partner, and also a stepping stone? Some nights, the answer rotated through all of them like phases of the moon. Most nights, I learned to shrug and make pasta. There were small karmas I didn't ask for. The role she lost went to a woman who had understudied her for months. The understudy thanked her publicly for teaching me by negative example what professionalism is not. And while I cringed at the meanness of it, I understood the relief of being in a room where people tell the truth. Simon moved to Los Angeles to get a reset, posted a picture in front of a palm tree, then deleted his account after the comments filled up with cheater in different tones of sarcasm. RR. Ruth sent me a card that said in her clear schoolteacher handwriting, "I'm sorry, we should have been kinder to what she loved." I put it in a drawer with the notes Mara had once left me because grief is messy and memory is not a courtroom with objections sustained or overruled. If you want an ending where I meet someone new and it all makes sense, you're going to be disappointed. 2 people flirted with me at a friend's housewarming and I couldn't remember how to flirt back. An old friend, Leah, who used to borrow my hoodies in college, started texting me songs to listen to, and once we sat on my porch and drank hot chocolate spiked with whiskey while snow fell in big, dopey flakes, and we didn't touch. The kindness of not touching was a revelation. Intimacy sometimes is a distance you can trust. Once, months after everything, I woke at 3 a.m. with that bolt of adrenaline you get when a bad dream follows you into the hallway. I walked to the kitchen and poured water, and the quiet was so total I could hear the house settle around me, this reminder that wood is a living thing that adjusts and forgives and keeps its shape. I thought then about the first time I'd seen Mara at that alley screening, the string lights, the smell of espresso that clung to her hair. I don't hate her. Worse, I will always like the way she laughed that first night. That's what nobody tells you about betrayal. You don't get to edit previous joy. You carry it alongside everything else, like 2 grocery bags pulling at the same shoulder. If you're expecting a moral, I'm suspicious of those. But I can tell you what steadiness means to me now. It's not about being the guy with extra chargers. It's about knowing when to leave a room with your life intact. It's about recognizing that love is a choice you make every day, and so is respect, and that one without the other is a trick mirror. It's about vengeance dressed as honesty, and honesty dressed as vengeance, and how sometimes the only way out is to show someone what the mirror actually reflects and then walk away before you become the reflection. If you're hearing this and thinking, I would have forgiven, I respect that. If you're hearing it and thinking, I would have burned it all down, I understand you too. I did both, in my way. I forgave enough to sleep, and I lit what needed lighting. The rest is just the practical work of being a person. Changing passwords, washing sheets, making dinner, watering the fern, leaving a note on a future I can't see yet that says simply, keep going. What would you have done in my place? Would you have tried to rebuild or let it fall and start over? Tell me in the comments what the right move is when the thing that breaks you is the thing you are most proud to love. And if you want more stories like this one, like the video, subscribe, and stick around. Apparently life doesn't run out of plot twists just because you beg it to.